In the summer of 1944, on a patch of earth where the hedgerows dragged dust like wounded shadows, a single question haunted every outpost. How many lives can a fraction of an inch decide? June 12th, 1944, 6 days after the Normandy landings. The smoke of the opening assault had barely lifted when the numbers began to carve their own bleak truth. Reports whispered across command tents. British and Canadian long-range teams were requiring more than twice as many attempts to complete a single assignment compared to their German counterparts. Every extra attempt meant seconds burned, positions exposed, and a margin of danger widening like a fault line beneath their feet. The figures stunned planners. 1.3 attempts per confirmed target on the German side. 2.8 attempts for Commonwealth teams. A 40% spike in frontline casualties. Why? Why, after years of preparation, after stockpiles of equipment and entire schools devoted to precision marksmanship, were elite units struggling in the fields of Normandy? What invisible hand was dragging their aim off course, forcing seasoned veterans to make adjustments they never needed before? Eyewitness accounts began sketching a pattern. Assignments requiring one measured action now demanded 2, sometimes 3. Each delay carried a cost. Each correction shifted the balance. Teams, trained for calm, single-breath decisions, found themselves wrestling with hesitation, engineered into their own tools. On quiet mornings, men who'd survived North Africa, Sicily, and Italy asked the same unnerving question: how does a mission fall apart before the real danger even begins? The answer wasn't in courage, or training, or judgment. It was mechanical, buried behind a layer of steel and tradition. A component designed for rugged dependability was resisting the very precision the mission demanded. And on the fields near Tilly-sur-Soise, where distances stretched and hedgerows carved sightlines into narrow corridors, that resistance became a quiet adversary of its own. The timeline of frustration unfolded hour by hour. At dawn, teams set up. By mid-morning, reports logged unexplained deviations, subtle but costly. By noon, field commanders noted the pattern. Every missed attempt meant more risk, more exposure, more uncertainty fed by seconds that should never have existed. Strategists studying the early Normandy data asked the hard questions. If a fraction of pressure could shift performance, what would happen over an entire campaign? How many missions would stall? How many units would lose momentum simply because the equipment refused to match the capability of the men holding it? And beneath all these questions lay an even sharper one. Was the problem truly unfixable, as the experts insisted, or had the war simply grown faster than the machinery built to serve it? In wars measured by divisions, tanks, and sweeping arrows on a map, history rarely pauses for a man with a file, a lathe, and a stubborn belief that one detail can change everything. Yet in the spring of 1944, while Europe shook under the weight of the largest military operation ever attempted, the future of an entire craft quietly shifted inside a cramped workshop in Portsmouth, lit by a single bulb, dust dragging across the floor like exhausted smoke. Harold "Harry" Bowman was 52, a craftsman, not a soldier, a man whose world was gears, springs, and the quiet certainty that geometry rarely lied. For 34 years, he had repaired farm shotguns, hunting rifles, and precision target arms for local shooting clubs. He knew the rhythm of clean engineering, the way sailors knew tides. And as casualty reports from Normandy filtered into English newspapers, cold, clipped summaries of men lost in the hedgerow maze, Bowman noticed a pattern that military planners seemed unable to see. Frontline reconnaissance teams were completing their missions, but at a cost that rose every day. Data from early June told a harsh truth. Commonwealth long-range teams reported over 70 assignments delayed or compromised during the first week alone. Efficiency rates dipped as much as 45% in the most restrictive sectors. Field intelligence units noted a persistent mechanical resistance affecting critical timing. Bowman read these numbers not as statistics, but as symptoms. Something in the system, something small, mechanical, overlooked, was dragging performance like a hidden anchor buried in the sand. He found the answer not on a battlefield, but on his workbench. A local rifle club had brought in a pre-war target arm for repair. Its mechanism, clean, adjustable, precise, held a subtle but powerful advantage over the standard military design. A small screw altered the engagement angle between two critical surfaces. That angle controlled both smoothness and predictability. Bowman leaned in, studying the gleam of machined steel under the workshop light. Angle controls pressure. Pressure controls certainty. Certainty controls outcomes. That idea struck him with the force of a revelation. He walked into the back room where he kept his own surplus, Lee Enfield, a rifle he had purchased in 1938 simply because he admired its rugged lines. He stripped the action, measured, remeasured, then stared at the numbers spreading across the paper. The standard engagement angle was shallow, roughly 35 degrees. That meant long travel, inconsistent pressure, and stacked resistance. It meant operators had to fight the mechanism to achieve clarity. What if that angle shifted to 60 degrees? Shorter travel, cleaner release, predictability, the currency of precision. And if that angle were paired with a tiny adjustment screw, he could maintain full safety tolerance while drastically reducing mechanical drag. One change, one screw, 1 hour of work. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he machined the new components, installed them on his personal rifle, and walked to a small range outside town. Under a June sky thick with coastal wind, he set 5 markers at 100 yards, exhaled, and let the mechanism decide its fate. The grouping tightened to 0.8 inches, a level of precision that pushed the old rifle into near-match performance. Before his modification, the same arm printed 2.3 inches. The grouping tightened to 0.8 inches, a level of precision that pushed the old rifle into near-match performance. Before his modification, the same arm printed 2.3 inches. Bowman stood there for several minutes, the smell of spent powder drifting across the grass, trying to grasp the enormity of what he had accidentally uncovered. If one civilian rifle could gain this advantage, what could an entire division gain? He wrote to the War Office that same afternoon. He included full schematics, angle diagrams, and the measured improvements. He mailed the envelope with a sense of urgency fed by belief that someone would understand the stakes. 3 weeks later, his reply arrived. A form letter, a generic thank you for public interest, a notice that all equipment improvements were reviewed only by qualified military authorities, signed not by an engineer nor by a strategist, but by a clerk. A dismissal wrapped in politeness. Bowman felt something tightening in his chest, not anger, but a deeper frustration. Men were risking their lives under conditions that an adjustment worth 3 shillings could meaningfully improve, and the machinery of oversight refused to even read his diagrams. Then a newspaper headline changed everything. It referenced rising losses among long-range units in the 51st Highland Division men who trained outside Aldershot, just 45 miles from Portsmouth. The article highlighted reduced operational efficiency, mission delays, and a growing disparity compared to opposing forces. To Bowman, this was no longer a matter of pride or recognition. It was a matter of conscience. On June 16th, he closed his shop, packed 5 modified assemblies into a leather case, and drove engine-hauling blades of wind down the coastal road toward Aldershot. He had no appointment, no authorization, and no guarantee anyone would even listen. But he had certainty. He had geometry, and he had the stubborn belief that when systems fail, individuals must step forward. What he didn't know not yet was that his arrival at Aldershot would ignite a confrontation, extending far beyond any workshop, drawing him into a collision with authority, tradition, and the full weight of military bureaucracy. Morning rain swept across the parade grounds like dragging dust, streaking metal roofs and pooling into thin mirrors of grey water. Inside a concrete conference room lit by humming fluorescents, 12 men took their seats, officers, instructors, evaluators, and veterans recently rotated from Normandy. Into this room stepped Harold Bowman, a civilian in worn boots and a coat still carrying the smell of machine oil. He wasn't supposed to be here, but history rarely asks for permission before walking through the door. The division commander, Lieutenant Colonel Robert "Mad Bob" Campbell, opened the meeting with a blunt sentence that cut through the room like a blade. "Gentlemen, our frontline teams are losing time and men because their equipment is resisting them." There it was, the truth stripped of ceremony. Campbell gestured toward Bowman, who set his leather case on the table. The officers exchanged glances, some curious, some skeptical, some borderline offended. Regulations were their compass. Deviations were storms. The War Office representative, Major Thornton, leaned back with the confidence of a man protected by policy. "Colonel, the Small Arms School has evaluated over 200 proposals since 1942. Not one has surpassed the existing specifications while preserving reliability. Field modifications only introduce liabilities." He delivered the words with the smoothness of someone who believed them. But the frontline data from Normandy told another story, one written not in theory but in consequence. In the first 2 weeks of the campaign, long-range teams requested over 90 mission reassignments because of timing issues. Coordination reports logged a 37% drop in successful first-attempt operations. Casualty summaries showed frontline reconnaissance groups sustaining nearly double the losses of comparable units, equipped with more stable systems. Numbers don't raise their voices, but in that room, they roared. Bowman stepped forward, opening his case. Inside lay 5 modified assemblies, small pieces of remachined steel, each stamped with the quiet precision of his craft. No theatrics, no speeches, just function. He spoke with calm conviction. The mechanism doesn't need to be replaced. It needs to be understood. Change the engagement angle, and you reduce resistance without compromising hold. Adjust the leverage, and you gain predictability. Geometry is not speculation. A silence followed, thick, reluctant, charged. Warrant Officer Davies, a senior instructor from the Small Arms School, frowned. "I've worked on these systems for 18 years. Increasing that angle reduces stability. Under mud, frost, or field debris, tolerances shift. Responsible engineering means preventing failure, not courting it." Bowman met his eyes. "Have you tested it under those conditions?" Davies hesitated. "I don't need to. The principles aren't matching the outcomes." Bowman cut in, quiet, respectful, but firm enough to tilt the room. "If theory declares something impossible while the field shows otherwise, it's theory that must adapt." It was a sentence fed by belief, and it struck harder than any metal on the table. Campbell leaned forward. "Davies, the reports from Normandy aren't abstract. These delays are real. If Mr. Bowman has a solution, we will test it thoroughly." Major Thornton straightened in protest. "Colonel, adopting unauthorized modifications violates 3 separate regulations. If these assemblies perform unpredictably, every officer who approved this will answer for it." Campbell's reply rolled through the room like distant thunder. "I have faced inquiries before. They don't frighten me, but equipment failing my men does." The veterans in the room shifted, exchanging looks. They had walked the hedgerows, felt the pressure of seconds stretching into risks. They knew the stakes. One of them, Sergeant William Reed, stood. "With respect, gentlemen," Reed said, "I've seen teams forced into second attempts simply because their equipment fought them. Those extra moments changed outcomes. If there's even a chance this improves timing, we don't need theory. We need results." Something shifted then, a hinge creaking between old doctrine and new possibility. Campbell made his decision. "Mr. Bowman will modify 50 assemblies under full supervision. We will test them in mud, frost, heat, repeated cycles, environmental stress, every trial in the school's manual. If they pass, they go to the next deployment group. No delays." The opposition fell into a tense, necessary silence. Because once the order was spoken, a new timeline unfurled, one that would stretch from Aldershot workshops to the fields of Normandy. The next morning, Dawn lifted over Aldershot like a thin sheet of hammered tin, cold, metallic, and unpromising. Bowman arrived at the workshop before the lights flickered on, carrying the weight of a decision that now stretched far beyond his hands. 50 assemblies, 50 test units, 50 chances to prove that geometry could outfight tradition. Inside the converted warehouse, machines hummed awake, tools clattered, officers in neat khaki stood beside armorers in oil-stained sleeves, a divided audience forced into cooperation. Yet in the air hung something electric anticipation fed by doubt, and doubt fed by the stakes. For 2 weeks, Bowman worked 16-hour days, machining, measuring, testing, recalibrating. He filed metal until sparks leapt like fireflies. He checked angles under magnification, 60 degrees razor clean. He tightened the adjustment screws until they sat flush, confident. And over those 2 weeks, the timeline from Normandy grew darker. Field reports disclosed the cost of hesitation. Over 120 missions delayed due to mechanical inconsistency. Timing errors contributing to dozens of compromised operations. A rising operational gap between Commonwealth and opposing units measured at nearly 50% efficiency disadvantage in long-range engagements. Numbers like these dragged concern across command maps like black ink bleeding through paper. Bowman kept working. When the 50th assembly clicked into place, the trials began. Test 1. Accuracy. The rifles were fired on controlled ranges 200 yards, military-issue ammunition. Standard units averaged 2.4-inch groupings. Bowman's modifications printed 1.2 inches, almost perfectly consistent across all 50 rifles. Even the most skeptical armorer muttered, "Impossible," under his breath. Test 2. Endurance. 500 cycles per rifle without cleaning. Not a single mechanical stoppage. Not a single irregular release. This result rattled Warrant Officer Davies. He reviewed the logs 3 times, lips tightening with every line. Test trays. Environment. Mud immersion. Overnight freezing at near zero temperatures. Heat testing to 120 degrees Fahrenheit under lamps hauling blades of white-hot light. Each rifle was shaken, dried, knocked, then tested again. Every mechanism responded cleanly. No drag, no hesitation, no shift in angle or force. A quiet awe seeped into the room. Test 4. Drop trials. 6-foot drop onto concrete. No misfires. No damage to engagement angles. No deviations in pressure. Davies finally spoke what he couldn't suppress. "I don't understand it. By every principle I know, this should not be stable." Campbell's reply landed like a verdict. Principes adjust. Result don't. By July 5th, 50 modified units were cleared and issued to departing long-range teams. Each mechanism bore a discrete HB engraved near the guard. Bowman's initials etched, not for pride, but to track performance. The units reached Normandy on July 8th, and the transformation began almost immediately. Near Écouché, Sergeant William Reed logged the first operational report. He described how the mechanism broke cleanly, no stacking, no drag, allowing him to complete an assignment at distances where, weeks earlier, teams struggled to achieve timing on the second attempt. Across the sector, the numbers turned a page in the campaign's narrative. Mission completion time improved by nearly 40%. First attempt accuracy rates jumped to over 75% in long-range conditions. Field efficiency doubled compared to early June data. Long-range sections reported sharp reductions in operational risk and exposure. Commanders studying the new reports saw a trend too strong to ignore. The modification didn't just help. It changed the math of the campaign. By mid-July, consolidated summaries from multiple divisions revealed a shift significant enough to ripple through headquarters. What had once been a mechanical disadvantage was now a strategic asset. In captured field notes, opposing officers acknowledged the sudden change. Teams previously hesitant now complete actions at longer ranges with higher certainty. Recommend increased caution in observation corridors. Bowman's work machined in a dim workshop was altering battlefield behavior across an entire region of France. And with every positive field report returning to Aldershot, a new tension formed. If steel and geometry could produce this shift, then the War Office would have to confront the truth it tried to ignore. By late July 1944, the hedgerows of Normandy no longer whispered uncertainty. They hummed with a new tempo, decisive, confident, sharp. 50 modified units, each carrying Harold Bowman's unseen fingerprint, had begun rewriting the rhythm of long-range operations. What started in a dim Portsmouth workshop was now dragging dust across European roads, bending outcomes, tightening margins, shifting the silent equation that governed risk and survival. The reports arrived like steady drumbeats. Between July 8th and July 31st, first attempt accuracy climbed to 76%, nearly doubling early June numbers. Mission completion delays dropped by over 40%. Field efficiency rose so sharply that several commanders described it as a structural advantage, not a mere improvement. And in the most telling statistic, operational losses among these teams fell by more than half, marking the steepest decline recorded in the entire Normandy campaign. Numbers don't brag, they simply reveal. And these numbers revealed that a small alteration measured in millimeters and degrees had altered the trajectory of entire units. But success, when it reaches the halls of authority, often encounters resistance instead of celebration. The War Office, confronted with data that contradicted years of doctrine, moved not with urgency, but with caution. Major Thornton filed an official protest, warning of unapproved field alterations and possible deviations from standard operating protocols. The establishment feared precedent. Frontline commanders feared losing momentum. Bowman feared nothing except silence. Then came August, an August dragged by heat, exhaustion, and a pivotal battle forming near Falaise. The Falaise pocket became the crucible. Stretching across fields carved by retreating columns and smoke-fed skies, it was the moment when precision mattered more than muscle, more than machines, more than strategy itself. Coordination units and reconnaissance teams, equipped with Bowman's modifications, reported unprecedented clarity in their long-range actions. Timing sharpened, delays evaporated. Outcomes became crisp where they had once been clouded with doubt. One report stood out. A veteran team, operating outside Troon, documented 23 successful long-range interactions out of 28 attempts, an efficiency rate exceeding 80%, far beyond early campaign performance. Command maps shifted accordingly. Lines tightened, movements accelerated, and as the pocket closed, senior officers across multiple divisions quietly admitted what frontline teams already knew. Something fundamental had changed. Back in London, military analysts spread field summaries across a long oak table. Charts lined with red ink, representing the unstable early June period, were now cut through with bands of sharp, clean black. Operational losses had dropped steeply, task efficiency had doubled, and the new accuracy curve rose in a way that no training update, no procedural revision, no staffing change could explain. One analyst murmured, "This is mechanical, not tactical." Another replied, "This is deliberate. Someone engineered this shift." Finally, the War Office sent word. The modification would receive full, official evaluation. But by the time the test results arrived, confirming Bowman's design, verifying his angles, his tolerances, his geometry history, had already judged him. The field had spoken long before the paperwork caught up. On October 12th, 1944, the War Office authorized the modification for full production. Over 3,000 units were scheduled for upgrade before VE Day. Armorers were trained using Bowman's diagrams drawn in pencil, smudged with oil, carried from his workshop like relics. The news reached Portsmouth quietly. Bowman was in his shop tuning a worn-out sporting rifle when the telegram arrived. He read the message under the dim bulb, light catching the metal filings scattered across his bench. He didn't smile. He didn't exhale triumph. He simply nodded. as though history had taken the shape it was always meant to. But the true recognition didn't come from ministries or signatures or memos typed in distant offices. It came later, weeks, months, years later, from the people who had lived the consequences of his work. In the winter of 1947, a small group of men from the 51st Highland Division traveled south, knocking on the door of Bowman's shop. They carried no medals, no official commendations, only quiet gratitude. One man, Sergeant William Reed, spoke with a voice worn by years but still steady. "Because of your design, some of us came home who wouldn't have. That's not theory, that's not regulation, that's life." Bowman excused himself, stepping into the back room. Witnesses would later say he wiped his glasses for a long time, though the lenses were already clean. More letters arrived through the years, over 127, preserved today in museum archives. Letters from men who returned home. Letters from families who were spared a hole at the dinner table. Letters from children who existed because their fathers survived the summer of 1944. One letter, dated 1952, carried a message that moved even the archivist who filed it. "Dear Mr. Bowman, my daughter was born last week. I named her Hope. She exists because I was able to come home. And I came home because you believed a small thing could make a big difference." History often spotlights generals, strategies, sweeping movements of armies. But sometimes history hinges on a craftsman working alone in a workshop, tightening a screw, changing an angle, challenging a doctrine. Sometimes the smallest component shifts the largest outcomes. And sometimes a single act of belief, quiet, stubborn, unwavering, saves people who will never know the name of the one who saved them. Bowman never asked for recognition. He simply believed that tools should serve people, not the other way around. And in that belief lies the message carried through the decades. Human ingenuity, when fed by conscience, can outshine even the darkest storms of war. A fraction of a degree can steer fate, and a single person, standing firm against doubt, can redraw the lines of history.